Creating the effect of grass is not easy, and this is as close as I've been able to get with volumetric materials, and it's sort of a bit too uniform. It's also quite slow to render. The first part of this is going to be making the material, and it doesn't matter what I make the material on, it's relevant. We've just got to go through the process of doing so. So if we go into the material lab, I'm going to need a diffuse green colour for the grass. I'm going to use specularity, so I'm going to have a specular green colour, and the transparent colour is also going to be green. What I'm going to do is use specular effect here to put highlight on the grass, and to create the illusion of the blades of grass I'm going to use transparency, and the specular halo to have a bright highlight on some of the blades is going to also be controlled by the same channel component here, texture component, as is controlling the transparency. So all we need to do is modify this now to make it give us the effect we want. And the other thing to note is that the transparency, you see, if you have transparency that's normal transparency, it means the material where it's transparent looks like a glass or a filter. And what we want is when it's transparent, like this, on blend transparency, we want it to disappear, because we're going to create blades of grass where the blades aren't. We want them to be invisible. We don't want them to be just really translucent. So blend transparency mode, and if we hold shift key down and click on the name, that'll let us go into the texture library. I'm going to use basic spots as our starting point. So that's basic spots. World space mapping is correct. The scales, I don't know, I'll just take the frequency up a bit for now, somewhere in that region, and then go into the deep texture editor. We're not going to need bump, we are going to need alpha. I'm checking the final component to make sure there's no phase in it, and there's no filter in the final combination, so that's good. For this combination I also check there's no phase. I'm changing the filter to power, and this is just going to help me control where the transparency is. About 3 is where you want it. So this is going to be the fully transparent area. That's where our blade of grass is going to be, and the colours, which are set up for linear interpol 3, are going to control the specular effect. So black where where it's transparent or spreading towards transparency, and fully white for these other two. So this is Camtasia Studio not helping me out. What I need is the noise dialog. Right, okay, for this, and I'm going to have to tip this up so that I want vertical blades of grass. So the world space means that these are now vertical. In 2 dimensions, that means we're getting the pattern on the top here, and this should just be uniformly the same all the way through. However, we're going to use leopard, and that behaves contrary to all the other noise functions. So when it's 1-dimensional, it's actually 2-dimensional somehow. When it's 2-dimensional, it's 3-dimensional. When it's 3-dimensional, I have no idea. So 2 dimensions is giving us these shapes that are going to look like blades of grass in the final output. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll check out of there. And this now is our material that looks like that. And if we go into the material library here, we can just save it somewhere where we can find it again. I just need somewhere where there's a bit of space. Okay, in Minecraft will do. So there's our grass material, and that is the first bit of the job of creating our grass illusion. The next bit is to put this material in an appropriate environment and to apply it to an appropriate object to make it work in our favour. On to the next stage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my own scenes as a basis for this final scene. So on brycetutorials.info, Bryce downloads, I'm going to use a scene from Bryce Pro Cloudscapes 2, but I'm not really going to use the clouds. It's mostly for the ground that I'm interested. This bright green terrain under here is what I'm going to use as the basis for what I'm going to put the grass effect on top of. So if I load that scene, if I can find that scene, I've got it handy here. So I'll just find my old scene. Don't need this one now, I can just copy over that. So that's the scene, and what I'm going to do is take the clouds and hide them. Don't need that. If I look in the families, you can see we've got a false sun and a fill light. This was made in Bryce 7 Pro, and things have improved even in Bryce 7.1 as far as lighting is concerned. So I'm going to get rid of those fill light and the false sun, and going to use the Bryce sun as it is. So I'll enable the sun. I was just checking what the lighting settings were, and give it a diffuse of 200 to make it a bit brighter. So see how that looks. Okay, looks a bit different because the sun's moved around. Materials have changed since Bryce 7 as well. So if we go into the terrain here, go into the material lab, and if we check on these material options, you'll see we're in Bryce 7.0 bump depreciated, and this got turned into an enhanced bump. So we can now turn that on, and that'll have an improved bump effect, and I'll increase the bump intensity a bit and see how that looks in our scene now. So at the moment it's quite plain, I suppose, and we're going to make more of a feature of the ground. So what I need to do is I'm going to change the aspect ratio of our picture, so I'll make it more monitor friendly shape. So we'll make that okay for the time being, and then I'm going to look at widening the field of view and moving the camera away a bit and just reposition the camera. So what I want is a nice long shot of something that's going to be filled with grass. So I need some fairly level ground as well to work with, particularly for the foreground grass, because if it's transparency you can see through it. So I'm getting the camera close to the ground here, and there's our terrain. You can see this blue line in the haze. What we can do to correct that is just lift the haze up a bit, and that incorporates it higher up so you don't get that divisional band, and to move the sun round to a more interesting position so that it's providing some shadows across here. The orangey light is being provided by the skylight, that's straight down, and then we've got this flat area here which is already green, but which I want to fill with a more realistic looking grass effect. I'm lowering the sun still further. What I want to do is try and coax some of these shadows further across, then it'll make more of the effects that I'm using on the grass, I think. Move it down and around a bit. It's a bit fiddly because if you go too far it becomes the moon. I might alter it manually by numbers. So okay, that's looking promising. Already you can see that I'm quite close to the ground, and it's sort of vaguely grassy effect. So I suppose let's get the grass effect in. I'm going to check the terrain we have here and make sure that this is now solid, because some of the light's getting behind the terrain, and the light can travel through it. If it's not solid, it can travel through the harsh bump, so if there was any risk of that happening, making it solid will prevent that. If I go into the Create lab, hold down the Control key and click on a terrain, that'll create a new terrain in default grey material. We'll find out where that is, it's just there. So I'm going to enlarge that terrain. I'm going to give it a family so I can see it in the view, and I'm going to turn it so the corner's facing the camera. It's below the surface at the moment. We seem to be zoomed out quite a long way, so I'm going to lift that up so that it's underneath the camera, and now you can see we've got this big terrain here, and I'm going to modify this terrain material. I'm going to make it I'm going to use new. I'm going to make it very noisy by holding down the key and doing the mouse to the right, so it makes a sharp noise pattern that I'm going to suppress, and this is what my grass material is going to go on. And because it's going on all these different sides, the blades will appear on the sides of this very noisy terrain. So I'm just positioning it now so that it's not obscuring the camera, but there's plenty of it that the light's falling on. That's important. So I don't want it to be too thick or too thin. So here you can see the ground's breaking through, so I know that it's fairly close to the ground, so I'll just move my camera across and round a bit, and then we can see how thick our grass is going to be Right, okay, I've lowered it down there so you can see ground's breaking through there. So it either needs to be higher, taller, or the whole plane needs lifting up. Right, we'll try and see how it looks in this position. So I know this doesn't look like grass yet, but we've got to apply the material to it now that we've created. So if we go into the material lab, grab our material that we made, this is our grass effect, and you'll notice immediately this slows the render down quite a lot. So the drawback of this is the complexity of the terrain means that with all the different levels of transparency you get to see through quite a bit of it. So to combat that, I'm now going to reduce the size of the document so it's smaller. It'll render a bit faster now. You can see sort of getting the effect there, and I think I'll save this. Right, just in case there's any crashes or anything. And now we'll try and modify it still further so we can make it look something like. So I'm going to move the sun round again, lower it down. So ideally I want one solution to the grass being fairly transparent. If I hold Control and Alt key and double click on the rollerball, then when I go to the wireframe I can hold Control and Alt and click on the wireframe view. Oops, I didn't want that to appear. And you can see you can place the sun where you want in your scene by doing so, and that can be an easier way of positioning the sun. One of the things you could do to make it look like the light was passing through the grass would be to make it ambient, an ambient response, but the drawback of that is that it would glow where it was in the shadows. So this is why this is perhaps a slightly superior method to this. What I'm trying to do is to get it so the light is clipping the top of the grass at the peaks, and this bit's in shadow here. You can see the ground's looking rather dark. Now it could be, if we modify the material, we could stop it casting shadows if that's making the ground look too dark there, and it also might improve the render time because it's having to work less. You know, it's having to work a lot less because it's not casting those shadows. So here we've got our grass effect, and the next thing to consider is, do we want the anti-aliasing to take place on the grass? Because when it's got these sharp highlights it actually looks quite good, but you can see that's on its final pass. If I just anti-alias a small bit in here now and let it have its final pass, I did say that it wasn't going to be the fastest. When it comes to anti-aliasing, not only is it very slow, as you can see, but it can spoil the effect somewhat. So you can turn that off locally for an object by going into the object's attributes and holding down the Shift and Control key and checking out again, and this means that the terrain here will no longer have an anti-alias pass, so it'll still remain sharp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift that up to make the grass a bit thinner, a thinner layer, but it's still looking quite busy and it's still catching the sunlight, and I'm going to give that a render and see how it looks. It says it's going to take 1:56, but I know from experience that the final AA pass will take longer, so we'll just pause it now. Okay, this looks okay, but I've not let it finish rendering out. It was taking ages, but I'm not entirely happy with the results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink the main terrain down a bit. Whoops, not that way, that way, and work on a smaller scale, which means I can have smaller scale grass as well, and it might render a bit faster, and hopefully by having smaller scale grass I'll be able to control the effect a bit and not have it just going into the distance without any illusion that it is actually grass, which was the whole aim of the thing anyway. So I'm just modifying the shape of things slightly so that I can try and emphasize what I'm looking for here. Right, okay, the ground's risen up and covered the grass up there, but perhaps on the other side of that there'll be a bit of a valley. Let's have a look. Yeah, we've lifted the sun a little bit. We can see now that the grass is over here, but it's not high enough. I wonder if I should try and cut the bottom of this terrain off, or lengthen that grass. So I did warn you that it was a fiddly process to set up. I hope I did anyway, because it is. Right. Does this look like a field of green? It might do. I'm going to try different angles for the sun as well. Just keep moving the sun around to see what the effect is on the appearance of the material. One of the things that could be slowing it down is the fact that there's nothing underneath this if there's a big gap. So I could create, well, I think actually I might have a plane in here already. I don't know what material is on that plane yet. I'll lift it up, see if I can find it. It's out there somewhere. I'm not sure where that is in relationship with, oh, it's really low down there. Let's see, lift it up so it's under the grass. Then I'll see what material we've got on it. Oh, it's just a light blocky. That might help our render speed though. Oh yes, it does, because it's the shadows are not travelling through onto this because it's diffuse 0. So so that might speed the render process up at least. So now we can just concern ourselves with the appearance of the grass. Say trying to organise it so the sun's clipping across the top of it nicely, putting it into shadow. Then we'll be able to see a bit of the form of the grass as well. The lower angles of the sun, the rays are travelling through more thickness of the terrain, so there's a bit of a drawback there, and we'll slow the effect down. But how grass-like is my grass looking now? Well, not bad in parts. I think it might be a bit tall, so we'll take this terrain and lower that down. We'll take the main terrain and squish it a bit. Probably have to lower it down a bit more. See how much of it's cutting off. Not too much of that in the foreground. Right. I'm going to lower the camera towards the surface maybe, or try lifting. I think one of the problems is I've got a hill right where the camera is, so if I can try and get it to where there's a valley, it won't obscure the view so much. If I spend a lot of time looking at the nano preview and trying to figure out what it's trying to show me, because the render speed for this being somewhat slow. I'll raise the sun, maybe it's improve the render time, but it won't have quite the effect that I was looking for. So I want to have these shadows here because it helps the appearance of that terrain too. So if I've turned the AA pass off on that, you can see that these are looking like lots and lots and lots and lots of little blades of grass now. But I don't want it too stretched. Let's lower that still further. You can see that's looking quite dark there because the ground's a bit too dark, but I can modify the ground plane material here, and I could have it not receive shadows but still have it some diffuse colour. So if I was make it a dark olivey green, it doesn't have to receive shadows, but that's really done it a bit too much there. It might just save us a bit of render time and create the illusion that things are filled in. You could put more complicated things underneath there if you wanted to. So I filled that in a little bit, still too bright. Alternatively, I could have lit it with ambient, but I'm saving that. So that doesn't look too bad now. It's not as dark as it was, and we've got sort of this grass effect sort of working for us now. I'm still not totally happy with the position of the sun. I'll save this again. Right, I'm going to move the sun round to the side there, see how that looks. Okay, and before rendering this, I did turn the anti-aliasing off for this, but it won't affect any other things that occur. Now, just checking that we're not using HDRI lighting. So if I was to take the trouble of putting the slab back in now, I just don't know whether it's going to cover the sun up and put the whole scene into shadow, which is always potential. Yes, there we go, it's gone into shadow now. So if I record this camera position and move round, I can see whether there's any gaps in the clouds. Oh look, I've managed to put the sun right behind a cloud. So if I move the sun to there, but keep it at more or less the same height, then it should shine through the gap in the clouds and onto my grass, and I can still have clouds in the scene. So I'll just pitch the camera back, because for once it's not the clouds that are going to slow this render down the most, it's going to be the grass effect. That's the render without anti-aliasing on this terrain. In fact, I didn't let it do its anti-aliasing because it was taking a very long time. But I'd already turned it off for that terrain anyway. The only difference would be that would be anti-aliased. So once again, delving deep into the Bryce toolset, we have this feature here that I don't imagine many people have experimented with. You can turn the AA tolerance around, so you can turn that up. So in actual fact, this allows it to what would you say, avoid anti-aliasing certain parts of the picture. Right, if the tolerance is 0, everything gets anti-aliased, irrespective. So what it's doing is comparing pixels side by side, and if they're within the tolerance, they don't get anti-aliased. So if you turn it up to 255, the maximum range, nothing will get anti-aliased because everything will be considered within tolerance. So if we take it to about 55, this means that the less stuff will get anti-aliased, but things that there's a radical difference in the pixels, adjacent pixels, will be anti-aliased. So this in turn will be mean that the clouds being quite smooth in their transitions will tend to avoid the anti-aliasing. And I also notice here that the maximum ray depth has been set down. This is another handy thing, since it will improve the render performance, but at the same time it will degrade the image depending on what you've got in the image. If there were reflective things in, you might then notice there weren't that many reflections between objects. So what I'll do now, since this top half of the picture is not going to change anyway, I'm going to restore, using terrain 2, the attributes. If I hold the shift key down and keep that pinned down and check out of the attributes, that'll now restore anti-aliasing. So we can try that with anti-aliasing, but reduced anti-aliasing, so it'll tolerate more, but I imagine it'll still take quite a while to render, so the aim will be not to render as little as possible. So I'll just plot render that bit, and then you'll see the effect of using the anti-aliasing tolerance. And if I check the clock now, okay, we'll see how long it's taken, because obviously this won't be a great guide here. Oh crikey, that says 21 minutes, and that's before I even considered the anti-aliasing pass. I don't know why it's so high. Okay, right, pause the video again. There then is the completed render. It actually took about 1 hour 15 minutes, so 1¼ hours to complete just this area, and the bulk of that was on the anti-alias pass. Like I say, the anti-alias tolerance will let things go where the pixels side by side are not terribly dissimilar, but if they're quite dissimilar, and in a noisy material like this there's quite a lot of dissimilarity, then it will anti-alias, and then it has to go through its anti-alias processes, which means a greater investigation of that area under the pixel, and that's why it slows it down. So not the easiest effect to achieve. I think it's okay. It looks quite good. We've got some sort of visible blades here, and it does go into a sort of general grassy feel texture in the distance. When you consider the render time, obviously you're going to need a lot of patience or a very fast computer, because it makes the cloud rendering look fast, and the cloud rendering is generally pretty slow. So there you go. That's how you achieve a grass effect in Bryce 7.1 Pro. Hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. Kind of tricky subject. Okay.